Hello, hello. Welcome to the Ideas Sleep Furiously podcast. This week I'm chatting with Ed Dutton. Ed is a professor of evolutionary psychology at Aspiro University in Poland. He is the author of many diverse books. I'm just going to read them out because they've got brilliant titles. The first one is Churchill's Headmaster, the sadist who nearly saved the British Empire. The second is At Our Wits' End, Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent and What It Means for the Future. I've read that one. It's brilliant. Witches, Feminism and the Fall of the West. Making Sense of Race. How to Judge People by What They Look Like. The Ruler of Cheshire. Sir Piers Dutton, Tudor Gangland and the Violent Politics of the Palatine. The Genius Famine, Why We Need Geniuses, Why They're Dying Out, Why We Must Rescue Them. And his latest book is Sent Before Their Time, Genius, Charisma and Being Born Prematurely. Now, if you Google Ed, you will find all manner of typical accusations levied at people who are researching these types of things. I mean, Ed's primary interest is intelligence, as is mine. There's a bizarre website called Rational Wiki, run by one bizarre human being who likes to malign people within this type of research area, evolutionary psychology. So you can Google away, or you can listen to the man himself. I prefer to do the latter. If you'd like to read more about this type of thing, then check out my Substack, which I've just launched. The link is down below. I'm going to be writing mainly on the psychology and philosophy of stupidity and giftedness. Remember that you can listen to this podcast on all the major podcasting platforms. But without further ado, I give you Ed Dutton. So, Ed, the first question that I start by asking is, what does it mean to be truly educated?
Oh, well, no, that's one of those, that's almost like an Oxford interview question, isn't it? I mean, that's one of those questions where
I'm not trying to trick you up.
Where you pretentiously signal your pseudo intelligence by asking, well, what do we mean by this and what do we mean by that? I think you know perfectly well that there are multiple ways in which the word educated could be defined, and there is a certain degree of dispute over it, which is exactly why the question is not really answerable, is it? I don't like the question. A question like that is exactly the kind of question that is a problem with academia at the moment. When I, let's say, send a paper on something that might relate to religion to a religious studies journal, rather than a science journal, then the religious studies journal will compel me to spend half the paper defining my terms, defining the word religion, defining the word intelligence. And that's all very well up to a point. But I think we have to, as Karl Popper argued, there's essentialism and there's nominalism. Essentialism is focused around defining our words and understanding the true nature of things in the Platonic world of forms. Nominalism is about how things work. And there has to be a balance between the two, what Karl Popper called cautious essentialism. We have to be able to define our terms up to a point. We have to be able to break up reality into chunks which allow correct predictions to be made, but to understand that those chunks into which we break up reality, to a certain extent, are subjective, but only to a certain extent, are never going to be perfect, and are therefore never going to be perfectly definable. You can never perfectly define the border between one race and another, or one species and another, or even one element and another.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly the kind of question that I remember when I was an undergraduate doing a theology degree. You'd pointlessly spend half the essay defining, what do we mean by Protestant? And I think it's unnecessary. And I think education and being educated is just another example of that.
Yeah, I get what you mean, because obviously a famous example of this, I guess a midwit example of this is when people say, well, you can't really define intelligence, can you? It's like, well, of course, any conceptual definition is going to have exceptions to rule. That's kind of what it means to be a definition if you know your basic philosophy, your basic epistemology. So perhaps I could rephrase it and ask, you've got two children, right? Is it a daughter and a son?
I do have two children.
So what, I don't know, what their education setup is like, but in terms of the finished product, what would you like them to come out with? If we say that they're
the finished product, or the finished finish.
Well, pun not intended. How would you like them to come out of school?
Oh no, that's a very difficult question in a way, because when when I was at 20 years ago, whatever, when I was at school, only about 25% of people went to university, and it was assumed that if you were reasonably intelligent, then you, but reasonably intelligent, let's say an IQ of at least 115 or 120, then it would be a good idea for you to go to university, and that you would benefit from this period of hedonism plus thought provocation. You would benefit even if you were doing a humanities degree and you weren't actually learning any specific transferable skills. Then you were learning the transferable skill of how to think critically, of how to have a certain degree of intellectual humility, of how to think logically, and of how to really pursue a topic in depth, and that could be transferred over to any aspect in life, and that was inherently a good thing. The problem is that the nature of university, when I was started in 1999, we were paying £1,000 tuition fees, and of course mummy and daddy paid that, and so it was a little bit like being at a private school that mummy and daddy
Well, there were
paid
grants
for.
too, right? I mean, it's not just that
no grants. There were no grants. Well, there may be for very poor students there were grants.
For low
there were no grants. For my parents' generation there were grants, but for my people born in 1980, no grant, and nothing, and you pay £1,000. In most kids' cases, it was just an extension of private school. Or, I mean, I didn't go to private school, but it was kind of like my brief experience of being at private school. Mummy and daddy pay for it, and that's that. You've worked jolly hard at school, you get to a good university, and mummy and daddy pay. And so you have this sense of humility, this sense that you're a child. To learn from the grown-ups who were born in the 1940s and 50s and whatever, and who, or even 30s, and who were lecturing there at the time, and and their attitude very much at the time was, if you don't like it, if it offends against your personal opinions, well, I'm afraid truth does not care about your personal opinions or your feelings or whatever. And so in that sense, university was it was the fag end of university, even a humanities degree being seen as inherently a good thing. And now subsequent to that, of course, they increased the tuition fees, and they increased the percentage of people going to 50%. Once you do that, it no longer has any prestige, and it alters the culture of the university. The people are stupider, and it alters the culture in the direction of what is associated with stupidity, which is black and white thinking, which is dogmatism, which is lack of logical thinking, which is emotion and that kind of thing. Yeah. And also they put in these ludicrous fees, which most people's mummies and daddies couldn't pay, and therefore they turn people at an age where people go through this psychologically, people become less and less neurotic as they get older, less and less mentally unstable, apart from a dip in their late teens, early 20s, where they become more mentally unstable. And it's been hypothesized that this is supposed to aid the breaking away from the family or whatever. But at that period, where they're the most mentally unstable and frightened and scared and therefore kind of Machiavellian and wanting control and all that, you give them a system where they pay to be educated. So, of course, they're going to demand that they don't get told things that offend them and upset them and whatever. And so it wrecks the whole system. And what you would expect to gradually happen is that prestige will, and I think this is already happening, the universities were once a system where it was basically it was related to the church, and it was the Church of England, and it was related to the public school system, and so on. And it was basically a finishing school for the gentry, for the aristocracy, and it had prestige in the same way that, I don't know, it wasn't particularly, Oxford and Cambridge were not academically prestigious. It was a bit like going to agricultural college today or something like that. It was something like that, and the prestige was at the Scottish universities, at London, and at the universities on the continent that actually taught science. That's where the clever people went. And I think that in 1870, this all reformed. And so prestige passed back to Oxford and Cambridge, and then places like it, Durham and Bristol and whatever, became these very prestigious universities. And therefore, people that are Machiavellian and whatever, they will go for that. They will go for power. Of course, they take them over. They ruin them. They mean that they're no longer about the truth, because once something is prestigious, it's prestigious because it has results. The results are fantastic inventions or whatever it happens to be. And of course, once those kinds of places that attract these geniuses, these high IQ autistics, basically, which is what comes up with amazing original stuff. Once they become prestigious, they attract in people who are reasonably clever, who are midwits, but who want to be there because it's prestigious. And those people will put power and prestige and whatever ahead of truth. And therefore you get a kind of priestly cycle of universities, whereby the university then goes into decline and prestige moves somewhere else. And so in answer to your question, my parents would have been very proud, of course. Yeah, okay, I went to a good university and all this stuff, and then I did a PhD and a good. I'm not sure I'd want that for my son. I wonder if the university, I mean, Finland always lags behind by about 20 years, whatever Britain does. But I wonder if it would be a better idea to just get some sort of trade. And what with the internet and so forth, if you want to educate yourself, as it were, if you want to be told about some particular topic, let's say humanities topic, in a structured, formal manner, such that it's imparted in such a way that you're more able to learn it, well, why not just do that online or something with some online, and they're developing, by the way, these online, private, non-accredited sort of universities. So I wonder if I would think in the same way as my parents did. Whereas when I was a kid, it struck me, both my parents went to university, and it struck me that there was just no question. I was, of course, going to go to university. But I'm not sure now whether I would, at least if it was a science degree, and the only way you could get a job was by having a degree from a recognized, well, perhaps then maybe, but certainly with a humanities degree or whatever, I wouldn't think it was a very good idea. Because they're not being taught the critical skills, and they're not being surrounded by highly intelligent, critical people. The culture of the university has sort of switched towards a religious institution.
Yeah, and if people are interested, I would highly urge them to check out the Genius Famine that you co-authored with Bruce Charlton, wasn't it? Yeah, so perhaps, I don't know, perhaps I'll throw this back at you. Perhaps we a meta answer to the question of what it means to be truly educated could mean to actually deconstruct that very question, right? Or, I mean, perhaps deconstruction isn't the answer you want to give, because a lot of midwittery takes place in the realm of deconstruction, right? But at least, you know, a questioning kind of a Socratic attitude, right?
I would hope so, and that's what I thought and that's what I think I got out of university. And I think that I was the last generation that got that out of university. And I think that it was because of the way that they have opened up university to the masses, the way that at some point university flipped. I think the takeover by women has been relevant as well. Because if you think
mean in terms like vice chancellorships or
anything like that, yeah. Because if you look at, if I refer back to the Genius Famine, or my more recent development of the Genius Famine, sent before their time, genius, charisma, and being born prematurely, then you see that what these universities were originally about. If we go back to the first priestly cycle of universities, you've got the Neo-Thomists, the Scholastics, the Scholastics, people like that. Now, what they're focused around, albeit within certain theological boundaries, is understanding the nature of the world through rigorous logical questioning. What this resulted in was universities becoming prestigious. What this resulted in was universities expanding and attracting into the university system people who were not these autistic types, these high IQ people that are relatively low in empathy. And because that's the nature of the genius, you have outlier high IQ, which means you're highly intelligent and you can comprehend things. Plus you have moderately low agreeableness, low empathy, autism, basically, or autistic traits anyway. And this means that you are obsessed with the truth, you are obsessed with systematizing, and you are low in empathy. So you don't allow anything to stand in the way of your pursuit of the truth. You don't care about other people's feelings, and even if you did care about them, you wouldn't be able to anticipate what they would be. So this is very important. You would get some people that might come up with a brilliant idea, but they would never present it, or they would vacillate about presenting it because of the offense it would cause. The genius isn't like that. And the other thing is that you have to be low in conscientiousness and impulse control, because if you're high in conscientiousness, you're rule following, you color within the lines, you follow the rules. If you're low in conscientiousness, then you think outside the box. You think things which for many people would be unthinkable. For a lot of people, it would be unthinkable that God didn't create the species quite separately. Just unthinkable. And so you have to have, what's going on here?
Sorry, I've just...
Oh, you went off a minute. You're frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just using a DSL.
You have to have this outlier high intelligence plus moderately low agreeableness and moderately low conscientiousness. Now, that's the genius type. What I call, what myself and Bruce Charlton call the head girl type, is very different from that. The head girl is normal range high intelligence and is high in agreeableness, is high in conscientiousness, and is high in ambition towards socially approved goals. Now, what does that mean? Well, people that have normal range high intelligence, that's not associated with autism, that's actually associated with social conformity. So it's been shown that within the normal range, intelligent people are better at norm mapping. They're better at working out what is the dominant perspective within the society. They're better at understanding the social benefits of adopting that dominant perspective. They have the effortful control to force themselves to adopt that dominant perspective and to come up with, to do the sufficient intellectual gymnastics in order to persuade themselves of its veracity. And so that is what they do. And then they will competitively signal that dominant perspective, pushing it ever more towards the left if it's a left-wing society, or towards the right if it's a right-wing society, creating runaway religiosity or runaway individualism. And that's why people like that were perfectly able to be heavily involved in the Nazi party under Nazi Germany, and then heavily involved in the Communist Party under the GDR. Because that's what they're like. And they're Machiavellian to a certain extent, and they put certain things, social status or not offending people or whatever it happens to be, above the pursuit of truth. So once those people, and women are much higher in this than men, remember, women are much more head girl like than men. They're higher in agreeableness, they're higher in conscientiousness, they are more diligent, and so on. And so if you were in an interview situation and you're interviewing two candidates for a job, you're interviewing this pretty young girl with all her straight A's and A stars, who's high in it would be A stars. That's another ridiculous thing to bring in an A star.
Soon it will be A star stars.
The A just becomes a B. I mean, it's meaningless. Yeah. Anyway, so they would be those kinds of people. And who are you going to employ? That person or this autistic weirdo? Yeah. Who might come up with something brilliant in the future, who knows, but is more likely to just go around offending people and upsetting people and pissing people off. Well, of course, then you employ the head girl, and then the head girl eventually gets into a position of power. Some sort of tipping point takes place. It could be 20%, it could be lower. It depends who you talk about. I mean, I think, is it not Gad Saad? What's his name? It's some other Middle Eastern name. He talks about how an intransigent minority of as little as 5% can start to push things in their direction.
Oh, Nassim Taleb.
That's yes. And then they take over, and then they recast the whole department and then the whole university in their image. And before long, if you think about the research by Simon Baron-Cohen, and he says that the male brain theory of autism, essentially they're two extremes of a spectrum, and that's a slight oversimplification. And he's since acknowledged that, but there's a certain degree to which that's true. At the one extreme you have systematizing, at the other extreme you have empathy. Well, then you get this push towards empathy and what women like, which is pushing empathy and equality, and basically what Jonathan Haidt would call individualizing values above the sort of sacred value of truth. And that's what's happened. And now it's gone to such an extreme that we've got to a point where universities are just becoming seen as a joke. And if I give you a particular example, the University of Oxford, for example, the pro-vice chancellor, or is it the deputy pro-vice? The deputy pro-vice chancellor, the person that's the second most important person at the University of Oxford, is a lesbian female Anglican priest called Jane Shaw, who writes for The Guardian and who has extraordinarily left-wing woke opinions. And she is in charge of the whole university. Now, if you go back 25 years, she was just a lecturer at an obscure Oxford college, Regent's Park College Hall, I think it's called. But now she's in charge. She's running things now. When she was young, she's running things. It's people like that are running things. And of course, this changes the whole nature of the university. And what it gradually means, I mean, it will take a long time. A lot of people have this essentialist view, and it's fascinating. They take the view, we have to get more people from working class backgrounds into Oxford and Cambridge. Yeah, we have to get it. 7% of people in England go to private schools. So surely only 7% of people at Oxford and Cambridge should go to private schools. But what they fail to understand is that people that go to private schools, it's not, yes, there may be only 20% of intelligence is environment. So there may be an extent to which these private schools do push people towards their phenotypic maximum intelligence. But on the other hand, about 80% of intelligence is genetic. and about 0.5 of what your personality is like is genetic. And so actually, you could probably take a lot of these people that have been to Eton and then go to Oxford or Cambridge, and you could stick them in a state school, and they'd still go to Oxford or Cambridge, because they're just congenitally highly intelligent. And that's the first thing it assumes, which is unfair. So therefore, it will exclude people who are more intelligent from the university simply because their parents are wealthy or their parents have chosen to send them to a particular school towards which there is inverted snobbery. But secondly, prestige is not something that is concrete. Prestige moves. If you exclude people who are part of the elite and the aristocracy and the nobility from Oxford, they will leave Oxford and they will take their prestige with them somewhere else. And I find it extraordinary. It's an example of uncautious essentialism. It's almost as if these people believe that in the world of forms, there's a Platonic prestige that has Oxford stamped on it. And they don't seem to understand that Oxford was in the past much less prestigious academically, not socially, but academically, than Edinburgh or Aberdeen or Leiden, or even doing the Grand Tour.
Yeah.
Where you would go with your private tutor to university, a bit of time at a German university, a bit of time at a French university, that sort of thing. That it's just going to be like that forever. It's not. You continue appointing people because they're black or because their parents never went to university or whatever. Then the prestige gradually saps away. And I think that's already started. I mean, I think even by the time I was at university, you had people who their parents went to Oxford and Cambridge, but no, they were at Durham or Bristol, and then it moves on from there. And eventually, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I'm told this is happening, that companies are going straight to the public schools and like a sort of milk round, but just for public schools, and taking people in on their own training schemes straight from the public schools and bypassing university. This is actually happening. And if that continues, then eventually the prestige university will be something that you go to. You can imagine someone saying, "Oh yeah, I wanted to be a plumber or an electrician, but I didn't do very well at school, so I had to go read history at Oxford. I'm going to try again, after I graduate and do my job as a barrister for a few years." But so that's potentially what could happen. Prestige does not sit still. That's the.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I thought I would. Throw in a smattering of anecdotes just in response that you might find enjoyable. I was listening to Scott Barry Kaufman interviewing Noam Chomsky many months ago, and he asked him a question, I think, about intelligence or whatever. They got onto the topic of MIT admissions, right? And Chomsky actually said, I think it might have been postgraduate admissions, PhD, whatever it was. And he was saying, we looked for people that didn't have the straight A's, the straight A stars, because that kind of indicated that you're probably a bit boring. There's nothing, if you're that kind of conscientious and you're just going through trying to maximize, everything, probably means that you don't have this focus that would make you a brilliant researcher in linguistics at MIT. So they're just a bit of anecdotal evidence to back.
That's a very good point. And if you look at the, as I said, as I've looked at in my new book, Sent Before Their Time, these geniuses tend to be late developers. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, people that are born prematurely are overrepresented for various reasons among geniuses. And those people tend to be late developers because they suffer from brain damage. And so it takes time for the brain to co-opt the non-damaged areas to do the things that the non-damaged areas to do the things that the damaged areas should do, which makes them think differently and whatever. But it does take time. So they tend to be late developers. Secondly, autistics tend to be late intellectual developers. In a sense, autistics have a kind of brain damage. They have developmental instability. They have a kind of brain damage. And so again, it means their brain works in this weird way. And so it takes time for it to co-opt the undamaged areas to do the damaged areas things. So they tend to be late developers. Thirdly, the people who are geniuses, one of the things it tends to correlate with is ADHD, which is very interesting because it means that what is it if you're a genius? It's almost like you have a mission. You have something that you're utterly fascinated by, and you don't give a damn about anything else. And that was certainly true of someone like Newton. He almost failed his degree at Cambridge. They had to do a second viva. Francis Crick was rejected from Cambridge, his first choice university, and had to go to London, where he got a second-class degree. And there are many, many other. Einstein was rejected from the college that he wanted to go to, and he had to do his doctorate part-time while working as a postal clerk. So there are many, many examples of this, I think, because of this. And the third thing is that they have the nature of their intelligence. This is also true of people born prematurely, tends to be skewed. So in general, you have this concept of G, which is if you have linguistic intelligence, you have spatial intelligence, and you have mathematical intelligence, and people that are good at one are normally similarly good at the other, although there might be some sort of tilt. And they sort of intercorrelate, and we have this concept of general intelligence, which underlies all of them. But with people who have outlier high IQ, or indeed with people that are autistic, or indeed with people that are born early, it's skewed. So you can find them very, very high in one area and deficient in others. And in that sense, the school system doesn't serve them well. Even the university system doesn't serve them well. Even IQ tests don't serve them well, and perhaps underestimate how intelligent they are. And so you get all of these anomalies whereby the person that is the genius will shine later in life when he finds his thing, which will take him time to do. Also, people that are autistic tend to suffer from borderline personality disorder to various degrees, and this means they have an unstable sense of self. They're not kind of sure who they are, and it takes them longer to work out who they are, and therefore it takes them longer to work out what they should have been working on all along. Francis Crick is another example of this. He dropped out of, I think, was it 3 doctorates before finding out what he should have been working on all along, and then he was brilliant. So I think the example you give from Chomsky is entirely consistent with what you find about the geniuses. I also recall there was someone, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. I never got to interview him. Very intelligent, interesting guy called Michael Persinger. And he was an American, but he researched the neuropsychology of religion at Laurentian University in Canada. He was famous for something called the God helmet, where you would put this helmet on, and it would electrically stimulate the brain, and it would induce religious experiences. And so his attitude was that religious experiences were sort of basically minor epileptic fits, basically very, very minor temporal lobe events. And they could be stimulated by his patented God helmet. And he put it on Richard Dawkins, and Richard Dawkins, alone among the celebrities that tried it, was not able to undergo an experience of God, because he's just totally down.
Road to Damascus.
He's just dead inside. But one of the things that Persinger said was that these people that were in his lab doing their PhDs, they're not the people that get the straight A's. They're not the people that get the best possible grades, but they are creative thinkers. And what that is an optimum relationship between intelligence and personality type. That is exactly the opposite of the head girl type. Yeah. The head girl type is very intelligent, but she is not a creative thinker. And the average scientist is exactly like that. So if you compare scientists who do humanities degrees, scientists are higher in agreeableness and higher in conscientiousness. Whereas people that are good at art, they're more sort of psychopathic and mentally unstable. So creativity is a combination of basically psychopathology and mental instability. And if you combine that with intelligence, high intelligence, then perhaps you can get the creative scientist. And it's noteworthy that there was a study by Simonton, I think his name is, that the people that are or Felix Post as well did a study on this, the people that are the innovators in a particular subject matter, let's say in physics, tend to have a psychology that is closer to if you have like a hierarchy of subjects. Mathematics is the most intelligent subject, physics, chemistry, biology, like that. And there tends to be like an intelligence gradient as you go down from those. Philosophy is a kind of exception because of it's a humanity, but you have to be very intelligent. But otherwise, there's this gradient. And the people that do the original stuff in a particular subject tend to have a psychology that is more similar to a subject much further down the hierarchy. So basically, as you go from humanities to science, agreeableness goes up, conscientiousness goes up, mental instability goes down. And so they have this different psychology from the pen pusher, the midwit, the head girl of their own subject. And they also tend to make, and this is also interesting, they also tend to make a contribution in an area that is not the one they're formally trained in. So you get the credentialist I call them the cuntdentialist, who insist that you can't say what have they got. If you're a midwit, if you're and you've got a PhD in science or something, you hate the fact that someone like me that does not have that has a PhD in religious studies has been made, albeit at a business school, a professor of evolutionary psychology. They hate that. They hate it.
So do you think what's going on there is obviously there are lots of separate things, but do you think one of them is actually jealousy because you've been able to co-author or author, what was it, like 100 academic papers, many of which are in evolutionary psychology, and you've written a variety of books. Do you think that it's kind of like a projection, some unconscious jealousy going on there?
I think a lot
as
of these people are perhaps quite narcissistic, and so this is a narcissistic injury for them, that someone that they hate, that has opinions that they don't like, that they know what I say about race and intelligence and these kinds of things. They know I'm right. But they have presented this narcissistic fake self, which gets them social status and power and a feeling that they're morally good and superior, that says, there's no race differences. Oh, what do we mean by race? What do we mean by education? All this stuff, right? But I don't think they feel it. They don't feel it. They know that they're lying to themselves and they're lying to everybody else. And so when I come along and say these kinds of things, it triggers them and it makes them realize how fake they are. And the purpose of this fakeness, I think, comes from a sense that these kinds of people have of not being worth much, a sense of inferiority, a sense of low self-esteem. Remember, being left-wing correlates significantly with being mentally unstable. And so they have all these feelings. And this makes them aware of those feelings, because if they don't have this, if this fake self, the thing that makes them better than others is left-wing opinions and those being right and them latching onto them and feeling that they're right on. If you show that to be, if you A, present them with that as being false, and B, show that that's nonsense, they've got nothing. They're just useless people. So I think it, as they would see it. So I think it A, triggers them. I think B, narcissism is associated with jealousy and competitiveness and whatever. So yeah, I think they are jealous. And C, it's more than jealous. It's like, how dare he? I have done the route you're supposed to do. Be bachelor in science, and I've done my PhD in science. I'm getting my unbelievable, this exists, doctoral loan. You're meant to get funding to do a doctorate, for God's sake. I mean, what's going on if you have to get a doctoral loan? But anyway, my doctoral loan, and I've done everything you're supposed to do. And this guy with his theology degree is getting published in Intelligence and Evolutionary Psychological Science,
which are racist journals.
Well, I don't know if that's the only very extreme people would say that, but so how dare he? I mean, this is outrageous. So when I announced online that I had been made a professor, there was outrage. There was a person called Kevin Bird who just said, "No, you're not. You're lying. You're lying." So I put up the certificate from the. First of all, someone said it's not a real university. It's not accredited. So I put up proof that it was. Then he said, "Oh, well, no, you haven't been made a professor. You're lying." So I put up proof that was not the case, that I wasn't lying. And then there was somebody called, I quote it in my book, called P.Z. Myers.
Yeah, P.Z.
And he
Myers,
said that I was a fake professor, and I showed I wasn't. And he said, well, you'd better be concerned because it seems very important to you to be called a professor or something. That was his response. That was he's moving the goalpost.
Do you find it a bit weird when I think is it Kevin Bird? I think it's him. He has in his Twitter bio radical scientist. Do you find that type of thing is like, surely there's just science, right? And whatever comes out comes out.
No, but no, that's not how he would see it at all. I mean, so he said, what was it? He said, he said, I said, I'm not a professor at the University of Oulu. No, because he'd said I was saying I was a professor at the University of Oulu. And he said, well, you ought to be a bit concerned since it's obviously important to you that you be called professor. I said, my dear fellow, maybe if you work a tad harder at the Institute of Higher Education, one day they might make you a full professor. Best of luck to you and your children. And he said, maybe if you were less of a fuckwit, you might become a real boy sometime too. Then he blocked me. This is a professor at University of Michigan. This is a lecturer at the University of Michigan. Wrote that in public. So I don't think that these people are. What the thing is that comment that you just made. Then the problem with that is that assumes that they're interested in consistency, and they're not. And it assumes that they're genuinely interested in science just for the sake of science and knowing the truth. But they're not. The I love science crowd, as we call them, the I love science crowd, the science popularizers, the Adam Rutherford types. I don't take the view that they don't love. They like status.
Yeah.
And they like
the instrumentalization of science in order to be able
right.
to
They like
fulfill
science in so much as it provides them with status.
Yes.
And if it stopped providing them with status, they wouldn't bother with it at all. But it does provide them with status, but the status has to come first. And so therefore, if there's something else that also gives you status, such as being woke, if you're a narcissist and being woke makes you admired and whatever, then the science has to bend to the wokeness. And so that's what they will present. They will present a science up to a point. It's a bit like a scientists in, I don't know, the 16th century or whatever. We'll present our science up to a point where it questions church dogma, and then we stop. And that's what they do. They will not suffer for their science, like Galileo suffered for science, or so that's the difference. They're ultimately interested in power and interested in status, and that is attractive to people that are high in narcissism, which is particularly vulnerable. Narcissism has been shown to be associated with mental instability, and a high in Machiavellianism, which has also been shown if you want power, if you see the world as an unfriendly, dangerous place, that you're frightened, then of course you want to have power over people and to control them. And so what you're dealing with is these Machiavellian narcissistic people, and those people are very, very motivated and very, very able to take control from mentally stable people that see the good in people and see the world as a good place. And that's what they've managed to do, I think.
Now for something completely different. I'm writing this book on giftedness, the mistreatment of gifted children, and I thought you'd be a good person to speak to. I kind of prefer Linda Gottfriedsen's scale, where she says, top 5%. She calls it the yours to lose group. So let's say these are the gifted people, and obviously reserve many caveats, like it's probably only the top 1% or maybe even a fraction of the top 1% who are actually responsible for producing truly novel insight and technology, as you say in At Our Wit's End, quoting Bruce Charlton's Pyramid. How do you see the future of the future for gifted people in the West?
Well, it's difficult. Well, first of all, when we say gifted, there's a purely intelligence understanding of that, which is that you have an IQ of above 135 or 130 or something like that. So you're in the top 2% or top 1% of the population. The problem with that is that when Terman tried to do his Termanites, his gifted children, to try and find geniuses, out of the people that were selected as Termanites, and out of those that applied, there was only one genius that came out of it, and that was James Watson. And James Watson was rejected because his IQ wasn't high enough. And his IQ probably wasn't high enough because he was autistic and he was a late developer and his IQ was skewed. And as I said earlier, for the reasons I said earlier. So I think I would be careful with any kind of giftedness scale, which is just based around intelligence,
of course.
and which doesn't take into account the extent to which a genuine genius like James Watson is probably underserved by these kinds of scales, and indeed by anything that it doesn't give him sufficient motivation and whatever. So that's the problem with them. Secondly, as for the future of genius, if we define a genius as
can we change it to giftedness, because I realize genius is a fraction. I'm more interested in
if we define it as if we say gifted, it kind of shifts though, because if the IQ of the society is going down, and there's evidence that the average IQ in Britain is going down by about 1.6 points per decade, and has been for some time, and this may actually accelerate because as the genetic level is selecting against IQ, which it is, then this will start meaning that we are not able to push our IQ to its phenotypic maximum, because the teaching quality will be worse, because the behavior of children will be worse, because the time left over to do intellectual pursuits will be worse as we struggle to survive, and all of this kind of thing. And so you would have a literal Flynn effect in reverse, in which there was a collapse of intelligence and we would stop passing on things and stop stimulating people and whatever. But so in that context, then the nature of the gifted person changes. So a person who is considered gifted in a society that has an average IQ, let's put it at 100, would not necessarily be gifted in a society with an average IQ of 107, and certainly wouldn't be gifted in an average IQ of 112. So in Ashkenazi Jewish society or something like that, he wouldn't be gifted there. So that's the first thing, that the nature of what is gifted is changing. Secondly, I would think that there's probably a sort of a snowball effect as our IQ collapses for both genetic and environmental reasons, where it gets much, much worse very quickly. So you're going to get a period where IQ is genetically going down, but we're carrying on an education system that has been that was founded by our ancestors when they were cleverer. And so even though we're getting genetically less intelligent, we're following that system which they founded. And that will help the gifted child, because that will push him to his phenotypic maximum. The problem comes, and I think it's already come, when the IQ becomes so low, and the concomitant, because the other thing that's happening is that we're basically selecting against group-oriented people, we're selecting for mentally unstable instability, or we have done rather in the past, and it's reached a tipping point of, let's say, 20%, and society has flipped over from being group-oriented to being individually oriented, and then you have runaway individualism, and the runaway individualism has led to this focus on equality and harm avoidance. Now, the harm avoidance, that might be quite good for the gifted child, because the gifted child might have autistic traits and things like that. But the equality will certainly. I was at Harry Potter World with my parents and children last month, and in Harry Potter World in Watford, they had a special autistic room where I thought it was a loo at first. I thought it was there was some euphemistic word for it, like calming room or something, and I thought it was just a new euphemism for having a wee. But I went in, and it was a very dark room where you can achieve complete darkness and silence and interesting flashing lights and whatever. So that would be perhaps good for those kinds of people. But the equality wouldn't. And the promoting, bad literature because it's written by a black person or whatever, the understimulating of the mind, the collapse of prestige for teachers, the poorer and poorer quality, all those things would be bad. So I would think that the future of giftedness is not good. I think that there may have been a period where we were a highly group-oriented society where gifted people were suppressed because gifted people tend to question things, including the religion. And there is now a period where gifted people are suppressed because they will tend to question things, including the individualistic religion. And then there's probably an optimum period between the two, where the group-oriented religion was in decline and the individualistic religion was on the rise, or was beneath the surface, where it was probably the optimum time to be gifted. And that may have been the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, something like that. Whereas now I think it's a problem for that reason. You have a society that does not value, that puts feelings very much ahead of truth. And I would argue that the gifted people, to the extent that it tends to associate with autism and things like this, are going to be very, very truth focused and so on. You have a system where increasingly, because of female equality and whatever, lots of stupid girls become teachers and things, and so that's going to understimulate the mind, as is postgraduate life understimulate the mind, and as IQ goes down, you have a society that is focused more towards the stupider person. And I think that a gifted person could feel very lonely, because there would be very few people that would even want to understand them. I have seen television programs about very gifted people, and they tend to have trouble having friends, because they just find most people so vacuously stupid. For a person that has an IQ of 150 to spend time with a person that has IQ of 100 would be like a person that has an IQ of 100 spending time with a person that's mentally retarded.
The analogy that a very prominent researcher, Australian researcher called Maraka Gross, uses in her book Exceptionally Gifted Children, where she says, let's imagine an experimental study whereby we took someone with an IQ of 100, right, someone at the mean, and we placed them for their entire duration of their schooling in a Down syndrome, or a classroom full of where the average IQ was 60 or 50. I think the average IQ for someone with Down syndrome is around that. Do we think that would get through any ethics committee? Of course not, and that's precisely what we do to gifted children. So it's absolutely abhorrent. I think it's as appalling, as disgusting as any form of prejudice, and that's obviously where my interest comes from. And I do tutor.
Are you one yourself?
So my my story is particularly interesting. I've recently found out, actually, I watched one of your videos on IVF. I recently found out that I was sperm donor conceived. So I've got a very odd backstory. My mum is a cleaner and a gardener. My who I thought was my dad was is a milkman. He's just retired. And I found out that I was born in 91. Oh, sorry, my camera's just gone. 1 second. I was born in 1991, and I found out that around about that time, it's almost certainly the case that the donors would have been doctors, medical students, and so I was not at all academic, and kind of lucked into the university pathway. I didn't know the difference between there, and there, or your and your at the age of 17. I didn't really know what a university was at the age of 17. So, I didn't do A levels. I got like 2 GCSEs because my parents didn't push me. I was only child. They had no kind of, like, as Bourdieu would say, cultural capital. So I just
where did you acquire the accent?
I think I changed that actually when I got to university. I've actually got a recording of me at 16. I didn't sound that different, but I think I certainly changed the way I spoke when I got to university. And yeah, I Facebook messaged this girl, this epitome of success. She was going to read chemistry at Durham. Straight A stars, the typical head girl type. We ended up dating, and she, yeah, precisely. And she said you should go to university, and so it was just, it's a
where did you go?
So I applied to just 5 different universities, obviously no A levels, and it was like foundation,
yes, I know,
physics.
Yeah,
and I got an offer from Loughborough, and got there within a few months. I was like, this isn't really for me doing physics, and so I went to a lot of lectures in philosophy and politics, and ended up doing a degree in political philosophy, and then went to Cambridge to do a master's, and got disillusioned with the kind of the allure of Oxbridge, and thought academia isn't for me. Then went to do a bit of teaching, and became even more disillusioned.
So, how old were you when your parents told you that you were conceived by
I found out because someone contacted me on 23andMe and said, I think that we might be half siblings. And this happened in October, so it's only recent. And
oh my goodness me! So what did you say to your parents? I mean, what?
Well,
how did that
I guess the most interesting part of the story before that is I was looking her up before. We now speak every day. It's a lovely relationship. But I found out, she went to Oxford to read classics, and suddenly I was like, okay, this is weird, because like I don't think I'm gifted, but there's certainly a big gap between me and my parents. So in terms of what we could discuss and our interests, so I approached my mum once we had the results confirmed, and she confirmed that it was IVF. So
listen, I've always wanted to interview an IVF child on my channel, and I interviewed Nick Fuentes, who is an IVF child, but he's not an IVF donor child. Right. I wanted an IVF donor child. You are one. Would you be prepared to come on my channel and talk about this? I would love to. I've really always wanted to interview. So I think it's a fascinating area. And the other thing is that it strikes me that, just as I've said with this new book of mine, I was born 3 months early. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there is a relationship between prematurity and genius, which I proved in this book, makes sense, because what genius seems to be is a combination of skewed intelligence, outlier high, and thus skewed intelligence. And that's what preemies have. They have skewed intelligence due to brain damage, combined with psychopathic traits, which is elevated among preemies, autism, which is elevated among preemies, ADHD, which is elevated among preemies. So basically, those things are developmental instability. So you've got developmental instability plus skewed intelligence. And those things are the essence of genius. So you would predict that preemies would, although the average IQ of preemies is lower than that of non-preemies, in the same way, the average IQ of left-handed people is lower than that of non-left-handed people, but you get more left-handed people with outlier high IQ. Yeah. And the reason for that is, and preemies are more left-handed than average as well, is because of this developmental instability plus high intelligence. And now I think that being a test tube baby, that's developmental instability, because it's the suboptimum place to be conceived in a petri dish and whatever. And also the mother's immune system is basically being bypassed. So when they would have taken your biological father's sperm, have you met you? Is he alive? Have you met this chap?
I'm looking for him.
Okay.
I'm going to try and hire a DA.
If you know his daughter, then surely.
Well, that's it. Yeah, but that's another sperm donor.
Oh, I see. Oh God. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I've just found out I've got a half brother as well. Well, and he's got a twin. So I've got
like
three.
It's like that film where he's got hundreds of them, and they all meet up.
It's going to be a clown car turning up at his door.
Oh, goodness me! The poor chap. Well, I don't know the poor chap in respect to him. I mean, he's the future of humanity. I mean, he could save us from dysgenics. But so obviously, okay, they take a sperm from his essence, and it is moving around. It's got a tail and whatever. It's a healthy sperm, but that isn't necessarily the 1 in 500 million sperm that gets through the immune system, right? It's not necessarily the best one. So therefore, you could get developmental instability. And if you get that plus the high IQ, which we'll get through anyway, probably, although developmental instability does reduce IQ, it's only normally limited degree, then you might get the sort of more genius type person. So my prediction, as the first IVF child was born in 1986 in England, and my prediction is that there's not enough of them yet. I mean, they're only at most in their mid-30s, but we will start to see IVF people being overrepresented among innovators. I think it will. That's what I would think based on the data I'm aware of. I mean, there's only 2 famous IVF people at the moment: Nick Fuentes and Billie Eilish. And that's not statistically significant. I mean, no one's going to use a sample of 2, but I think that there might be something like this. So why didn't they tell you? I mean, I would have thought it was much more healthy to just tell you.
Perhaps we should save this for the conversation on your channel. But to answer that question, very briefly, I think in the 90s they were just advised not to. Nowadays, you're told, from my cursory research, that you should tell the child at a very young age, and basically as soon as they can understand things and speak, and then it just becomes normalized, right? It just becomes a story. So yeah, I think that was generally what people were told. Very working class people tend to follow orders. But having said that, this half sister Laura, her parents are middle class. They're both one's a psychotherapist, another is a social worker, and I think there was a lot of shame there. A lot of shame, especially on the father's side.
You're a man and you can't produce.
Can't do the business,
at all. And it's not even that you have to have IVF with your own sperm. That might be bad enough. It's that with someone else's sperm, you're literally infertile. So I can see it would be very upsetting for your father. Anyway, that's what I think it will. We'll save this for. This is very interesting. I think that this is serendipity. This is, but it will. But I thought immediately when I was talking to you, immediately I was aware from of high intelligence. It's obvious from the shape of the face, the voice, the vocabulary, and the speed of talking. And so there are certain markers, and you just after a while you just know it. And so that's why I wonder if that's what I was dealing with. Anyway, we've gone off topic. You wanted me to talk about various things, but yes, if there's anything else.
How long do you have, by the way? I want to be respectful of your time, but I'd love to.
I mean, it's hour and a half is fine. It's fine.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you if you're familiar with any evidence against G decline. I was listening to Richard Heyer talk on, was it Kurt Mangel's channel, Theory of Everything, and he was saying that it's still a contested topic. But when I read your book, right, and you go through the phenotypic evidence, and then we land at the end on the was it the chronometric evidence, right, the genotypic evidence. It seems not like a clear-cut case. But the weight of evidence is excruciatingly in favour. So I was just wondering.
I don't think that. I don't know how you could I don't see how you could attempt to argue it's not happening. And there's more published all the time. So there was a paper published recently which showed that I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. There are certain what you might call positive things that are being selected for. So agreeableness correlates with fertility, for example. People that are kind, nice, and you could argue having children is a selfless act. Well, in some cultures, it's a sort of extension of self. That's it. There's two things that predict having children. One is agreeableness, and the other is a subsection of narcissism. And it's what's causing that is that basically narcissistic women, they have children so they can get a free house or whatever in a welfare system, and you might get some people that have children and go, oh, look at you, you've had a child, well done. So but in general, its agreeableness is positively correlated with having children. K strategy, more broadly, there's some evidence is positively. So it's like there's a coming apart. So who's having children? It is people that have low IQ, low conscientiousness. They're having children. But then on the other hand, people that are religious, which is itself a marker of a sort of slow life history strategy, people that are slow life history strategists, and people who are high in agreeableness, they're having children. And also within the top quartile of intelligence, religiousness is the sort of big predictor of having children. So being left wing is a major a cause of sterility. If you look among the most intelligent people, if they are left wing, they don't have children at all. So people that have IQ of above 115, if they are left wing, they just don't breed. If you look above IQ of 115, the ones that do breed are overwhelmingly religious and conservative people. So those things are the protective shell that is slowing down the decline of intelligence. There's a couple of anomalies. So there's data indicating that IQ is going down in Finland based on military data and has been going down since 1997. And there's data indicating, I think I'm right in saying that IQ is going down in Sweden, again, based on military data. But there's this weird anomaly whereby there is a positive association among men, though not so much among women, between fertility and IQ in Sweden and possibly in Finland. So there's something strange. I don't know what it's to do with. I wondered if it seems to be that it is powered by men in Sweden and Finland that have very low IQ not being able to find wives at all. So I wonder if what's going on is if in Finland anyway, which is this relative to England, a much more pro-social, high agreeableness, high conscientiousness, cooperative, shame-oriented society. I wonder if at a certain level, people of the same IQ have a higher sort of general factor of personality, and therefore they don't want to sponge off the society, and therefore they don't have children. People of the same low IQ. And also in this country, if you are of low IQ, of course, that associates with poor impulse control and becoming an alcoholic. Now, in England, we don't have this ADH2 gene or whatever to the same extent. We adopted agriculture much earlier than Finland. So you've got a lot of people here that say they have low IQ and they've got that gene or something like it. Then they become alcoholics, and then they're repellent to women and they just won't breed. They're just repellent to them because they're alcoholics. And that wouldn't happen in Britain. The same people would drink heavily, fine, but they wouldn't actually become alcoholics. And so maybe that sort of interferes with the general trend in some way that we don't understand.
Is it true that the sub 85 IQs are the only, in most Western countries, are the only group, the only IQ group that are actually above replacement fertility?
That's my understanding. There was a book by Adam Perkins called The Welfare Trait, and he showed that if you divide England up between where families where both parents are working, which would be an average IQ of 100, families where one parent is on welfare, let's say 90, and families where both parents are on welfare, let's say 85, and families where both parents are on welfare and they are involved in crime and they have to have social workers in and the police come round and all that. It is only that criminal underclass, not even the underclass, criminal underclass, that is breeding at above replacement fertility. So the future is, as I see it, is a kind of coming apart of society. The more intelligent people, the more conservative people, the more religious people, the more agreeable people go, leave, try and find, a sort of neo-Byzantium. I look at this in a forthcoming book with J.O.A. Rayner Hill's The Past is a Future Country, the coming conservative demographic revolution. It's coming out in July. We look at big data on this. And then you have the others who low IQ, low general factor of personality, whatever, physically sick as well, because those things intercorrelate. Being high in mutational load basically correlates with low IQ. Low IQ genetically correlates with heart disease and strokes and things like this. So there will be like this coming apart, and then there'll probably be a racial coming apart, and I guess you'll get certain intelligent Black people, intelligent Asian people that will white align and will go to the Byzantium type thing, where civilization holds out against the enemy at the gate, and then you'll get perhaps some white people that will black align, and there'll be some process like that. And something quite similar happened last time. I mean, at the fall of Rome, although it was nothing like as extreme as this is going to be, because in Malthusian terms, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. You have this society which has basically created for itself a massive warm period. And that warm period is sustained by the intelligence of that society and the fruits of that intelligence. And eventually, as the society becomes less intelligent, as the society becomes more genetically diverse, as the society becomes more balkanized, as it starts fighting and warring and whatever, as we're sort of seeing, then you would expect it to be less able to sustain that artificial warm period. And then you get a situation where huge swathes of the population are reliant on the fruit of civilization for medicine, for whatever. When that goes, then they die. So you get an enormous collapse. And also one of the things that could be happening is that we are possibly selecting for a desire to have children. Either those that can be inculcated via wokeness or dysphoria or a sense of despair or whatever, to not have children, will not have children in this context. We're not being pushed towards having it. We're being told, oh, don't have it for the good of the environment, don't have it for the good of the poor little bunny ones. And so therefore all that will be left is people, either because they're stupid or because they're religious, who will have a strong desire to have children or an inability to not have children. And so therefore you select for those people, and then you get a massive population spike, and then there isn't enough food, and then you get a population crash in a context in which people are increasingly stupid. And therefore the problems that would need to be solved will not be solved, and therefore there'd be an enormous crash. At least 90% of the population would die. And the people that would escape from that would be the highly intelligent and the psychopathic and various other people that would be able to survive in that kind of ecology.
How does your personal politics interact with your research? How would you describe yourself politically?
I would describe myself as a very, 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 very high Tory.
High Tory.
So high that you get vertigo or you can't breathe properly. There's not enough oxygen at the height.
Is that a Peter Hitchens style Tory?
Oh, I don't know about that, but no, higher than him. No, so high that you get altitude sickness. That kind of level of Tory. A very high. Or maybe I would describe myself. What I like saying when woke journalists ask me that, I say I'm a British imperialist. Let's stick with that. I'm a British imperialist, a 19th century British imperialist. That's what I am.
But so what about like views on the welfare state, for example? Someone like Hitchens would support a strong welfare state. But if you follow, for example, Charles Murray's writings, and you could argue there's kind of an is-ought gap there in the bell curve between its normative prescriptions. But would you favour a strong welfare net?
I feel that politics is below my pay grade. Really, I'm here to look at the science and to look at what's going on, and I don't know that people always ask me. I often get asked, "My child, do you believe in God?" Right. Why are you asking me this? Why is it relevant? So what? What relevance to my video on whatever it is I've done it on is the fact whether I do or don't believe in God. Why are you asking? Because you want to put me in some box or something, or because you want to know whether I'm on your side in some important way? I don't think it's relevant. Personally, I think that the welfare state in some mild form, a society that is remotely compassionate should have some sort of safety net. You could argue that if it can afford to have it. But it should be a safety net. It shouldn't be desirable. It shouldn't be something you could possibly live off. And that's what it was when it was set up. It was that you don't starve. Now it's that you've got the right to have an iPhone, you've got the right to have television, and you've got the right to have this, that, and the other. And so you get this crazy situation where people that have a large family can earn more. Essentially have more money, earn more money, and have a larger property than people that work hard and whatever, and just can't bring themselves to behave in such a feckless way.
And universal basic income is the apotheosis of that ideology.
Well, that's the most appallingly stupid idea, because then you've got no. I mean, one of the things that makes us humans is that we struggle. We have to struggle. And one of the reasons why we have got this dysphoria that we have, where we stop believing in God and we become maladaptive and we become nihilistic, is because we're in an evolutionary mismatch in which we're not struggling. We're not struggling. There's no mortality salience. There's no whatever. There's no struggle. It's an evolutionary mismatch. It's like keeping an animal in a zoo. And then the animal becomes unhappy and starts eating its own tail or doing maladaptive things. Well, that's exactly what we do. That's exactly us, precisely us. Now, the way they dealt with that in the past with the upper class, they took the view, oh, well, the upper class could become decadent and whatever, and so therefore we have to make the upper class group selected via the public school system, via the prep school system and whatever, and have this sense of group orientation. And that's what they did. And then everybody else was surrounded by mortality salience and struggle anyway. And so and then you get rid of that, and then you just get decadent, selfish, entitled, narcissistic people. So no, a universal basic income for some people would be brilliant. I mean, for some people who are
the autistic genius type who shouldn't be going to Cambridge.
All they need, as me and Bruce looked at in the Genius Famine, that's what they're not even particularly materialistic. All they want is just a basic level of comfort. That's all they want, to be able to go away and do their genius work. For those people, they should be identified, discovered. There should be a system of discovering them, and they should be given a universal basic income. I'm completely in favor of that. But for everybody else, no.
Yeah, this is what I'm writing about in the final part of the book, or I call it the Gifted Revolution. An extensive, thorough scouting system where, as you said earlier, you can't just rely on something as, what would you say, as inefficient as IQ, because it misses out so much. Because these people have nowhere left to turn. I wonder if you're in favour.
Well, what they used to have, which was good, was they could become. I did a video on this. It's amazing the number of innovations that were made by British country clergymen. So they had these sinecures. Bruce, what's his name? Bryson writes about this. There's this book he did on this. Bryson. They had these sinecures where basically they had quite a good income, a house, servants, and they had hardly any work to do, and so they could just do their hobbies. Now, most of them just wasted it away and didn't do anything particularly useful. But quite a few of them, or not should I say, quite a few of the major inventors, even the inventor of the spinning jenny, or something like that, were rural clergymen. And they just spent all their spare time doing their genius work. So if there could be something like that, that would be good.
You'd be in favour of gifted schools?
Well, yeah, sort of. But the problem with that is that you're then going to get kids that are borderline gifted, and they get smacked in the face and told they're no good at a very young age, and then it sticks with them, and they're bitter and all this sort of stuff. So I don't know, but there's something like that, yeah. Or that it would be not as black and white as one exam that you take at a particular age and you pass or fail, because that was the problem with the 11 plus and such like exams, is that people develop at different rates. The correlation between IQ aged
11 and 16 is like
11
0.42
and
or
18
something.
was something like 0.7 or 0.6, and that's enough room for things to change among a portion of the population. So it would have to be an ongoing thing rather than something that's just at this particular age you take it.
Yeah, well, I think in Deary's study of 70,000 GCSE students, the correlation was something like 0.71.
Yeah,
but
something
then
it's something
the IQ
like that.
test, it was
But
like
it's
even
certainly
lower.
not.
Like,
It's certainly not 0.9 or anything
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
It's enough for a significant proportion of people
yeah,
that would go to a school like that to be ungifted by the
yeah.
age of 18, and for a significant portion of people that would not go to a school like that to be gifted by the age of 18. So it's that's the problem with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I certainly feel that that's my story. In a nutshell, there was a lot of variance there. So, how would you say that your research, your work? Well, I wonder if it has changed your view of what education should be like generally, and perhaps, again, coming back to your own children. I wonder. You must be familiar with Ploman's view that these environmental factors explain, maybe, if we're lucky, about 5% of the variance. So he's effectively saying schools don't do a lot. Now, I'm not familiar enough with statistics and genetics to say, well, I imagine what he's saying.
There would be some children for whom school would do a lot. Because it would, I met kids like this. So they're not very bright, but they've got bright parents, let's say, but they're not very bright themselves. And they go to a public school, and they're pushed to their phenotypic maximum, and they're spoon-fed, and they get their AAB or whatever, A level, and they go to Durham, and then they're just on their own. And what that means is that they create their own environment consistent with their own innate IQ for the first time in their lives. Whereas theretofore, it's been Eton that's been creating their environment, and the highly intelligent teachers and other pupils that you get there. And then, of course, their IQ goes down, and they get a 2-2 or a third. And I met a number of people like that. So for them, it's good. But for most people, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference. I suppose it would speed it up. So someone like you that's had a fairly crap education, by the sounds of it, it might have been good for you because you had the poverty of aspiration and that sort of thing. So that's a kind of outlier. It's very rare that someone as intelligent as you is born to parents like yours. And of course, as you know, you weren't born to parents like yours. You were born to your mother, but not to your father. And so it's an extreme outlier. But in most cases, the correlation of social, I think Gregory Clark in his book, The Sun Also Rises, showed that across 3 generations, the correlation of socioeconomic status is about 0.7. So again, that's enough room for whatever. But in general, it's highly heritable. And I don't. I mean, the idea of deliberately sending people to a shit school seems fairly stupid. I think it would be good if the schools were as good as possible. I think they're probably decreasingly good because of the low prestige in which the teaching profession is held. Once something tips over to being seen as women's work, which is what teaching is now. It's about 70% of teachers are women, and it's about 85% of primary school teachers. Then it has no prestige even for women. Whereas when I was at school, you'd get people like one of my teachers. You get teachers that were highly intelligent, but they became teachers in the 40s or 50s, and they were told, well, they want to be a lawyer. You can't be a lawyer. You're a girl. Be a teacher. All right, I'll be a teacher. So you've got someone that today would be a barrister or something, but back then they're being an English teacher. And of course, those people are gone. It's very much the sort of IQ 115 type people, or even lower than that become teachers. So that's a serious problem for the schools. And there's not a lot you can do about it, because once it's seen as a women's job, it's out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was at Homerton College, Cambridge, which is adjacent to the
Teaching
education
college.
faculty. Yeah, it was. I think founded, as the teaching college. Anyway, lived with a load of teachers, and I was just so viewers are aware, you do a PGC in the UK, and that's your teaching qualification. And I was just astounded by how dumb the average. I mean, I must have lived with 8 or 9, so the sample size is small. It's anecdotal, right? Of course, but there was a history teacher in training, and I think she'd done her undergraduate degree at a Russell Group University. And I said, well, I think we were talking about the Roman Empire. She didn't know who Charlemagne was. Okay, this is anecdotal, but I was just flabbergasted. So you certainly have a problem. And of course, there's another thing you might be interested in, which is that at these more prestigious education faculties where I think most of the academics there don't know anything about statistics or intelligence, generally speaking. Anyway, they have a lot of scorn for the people coming to their PGC, which is a nonsense qualification anyway, and then going off into the private sector, right? It's considered just that you're a traitor. So that it's as I'm sure it's a highly ideological environment anyway. But there's a kind of like a funneling problem in regards to getting good teachers into the state sector anyway.
I used to be the sort of de facto Finland correspondent for the Times educational supplement. They were very interested in education in Finland, and I used to file an article every month or so for the Times educational supplement back in 2010, 2013 or 14. And the sub-editor would get back to me the things that needed to be explained to these people. Like they didn't know what statistical significance was for a start. And there were many other things where the sub-editor would get back to me with things that I thought were quite obvious. And he would say, no, say that in another way. That's not clear. It won't be clear to the readers. He was clear to him. It won't be clear to the readers.
Well, I've got Charles Murray's book over here that's Real Education. I think he wrote it in about 2008, and he says it in Human Diversity as well. But he says I can assume that everyone reading my book is probably a standard deviation above the mean. But I know that most of you won't know what a standard deviation is, right? So he has this appendix in Human Diversity. I think it's copy and pasted from the bell curve, and he says it in Real Education, which is a very short book. That I'm going to have to talk about percentages because that's how poor the education system is. Even though I know that my average reader is very bright, most people don't have even the basic understanding of.
To not know percentages. I mean, that's just unbelievable. My 13-year-old daughter understands percentages. I mean, I would find it incredible that they wouldn't know percentages. Although I've never understood why some people write percent, PERCENT, as one word.
Yes, yeah.
And clearly, in Latin, it is percent, two words. But Americans seem to do that for some reason.
Americans do many weird things. We don't have to.
They write the word acknowledgement without an E. There's all kinds of peculiar things that they do.
Yeah. I was going to ask you a very random question. Do you know whether there's any validity to the idea? I saw a paper published a few years ago that suggested that that IQ or intelligence, G, whatever you want to call it, I use them interchangeably for now, it's predominantly from the mother's side.
No, I believe that's not true.
Yeah, it's one of those things that every paper wrote it up.
Not. There was a paper that came out on it many years ago, 10 years ago or something. 12 years ago, and it was thoroughly critiqued, and problems were found with it. And my understanding is that's not the case. It's not predominantly from the mother's side, or if it is from the mother's side, maybe there's some mediating factor, like that you spend more time with the mother at a certain cognitively plastic age or something like that. But I'm not aware that's the case. No, you do have a very unusual shade of hair, and I've only in my life met two people that have that shade of hair. So I wonder if they're related to you. And one of them is the daughter of a doctor.
Oh, is she sperm donor conceived?
I don't think so. No.
It could be my light. I've got it on a very yellow.
It could be something related. It could be her and twins from Watford. No, it can't. But it's very unusual hair color. I don't know what you would call it. Sort of.
It's just
copper. It's not ginger. Auburn? It's not brown. Auburn, I suppose, but it's an unusual hair color. That might help you out in your search for your unless it's from your mother's side. Unless it's from her side, then of course it doesn't help you at all.
It'll help out the DNA detective.
Yes. Is there anything else?
Let's have a look through notes quickly. I was going to ask you whether you're what you think about, I think it's called the Savannah hypothesis, and I can never pronounce the guy's name. LSE. Is it
Satoshi Kanazawa?
That's the dude. Yeah.
I wrote one of my first articles in a science journal was in 2013, and it was a critique of that hypothesis. And I think that the problem with it in the form that he presents it is that what he regards as evolutionarily familiar and what he regards as evolutionary novel is quite subjective. So you could say that belief in God is evolutionarily novel, familiar, because historically we all believe in God. Atheism is evolutionarily novel, but alternatively you could say, well, look, if you look at these tribes or whatever on the savannah, they don't believe in God. They believe in spirits and ancestors and things. This makes belief in God evolutionarily novel. And so it therefore doesn't make predictions. It doesn't make any sense. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the idea that, oh, well, we're evolved to live on the savannah. Right? That's not true. Evolution sped up on the Holocene. I mean, as Cochrane and Harpending note in the 10,000-year explosion, we're not evolved to live on the savannah. We people that are, some of us are, if we're Bushmen or something like that, but farming had a huge impact on evolution. And so therefore, no, we're evolved to live in an agricultural economy. So that's also inaccurate. So I don't think he's right about that. I think what might make more sense is a development of his model, which myself and Dimitri van der Linden did in a paper where we tried to understand why there was a correlation between between intelligence and belief in God, is that if you are intelligent, then you might something that will help you to solve a cognitive problem is that you don't immediately go for the instinctive response, which is kind of what's, in a nuanced way, what Kanazawa is saying. He's saying that intelligence is evolutionarily novel, and so therefore you're more intelligent. You'll have other evolutionary novel preferences. Intelligence is one, atheism is another. I'm saying intelligence, you will be better able to solve things basically if you are less in touch with your instincts, if you're able to suppress, as it were, instinct, cognitive bias, whatever you want to call it, better. And that will, if you can overcome cognitive bias, instinct, whatever, better, you will better be able to solve problems. You will have a higher IQ. So it would potentially follow that more intelligent people would be lower, as it were, in instinct, in instinctiveness. And one of the instincts we seem to have, in so much as it's genetic, partly in so much as it hits it in times of stress, in so much as there are certain brain areas associated with it, etc., is religious belief. And so, and also it's been found that people that are more intelligent are more environmentally plastic than people that are less intelligent, which would be consistent with them being lower in instinct. So me and Dimitri van der Linden presented this, I guess it was stimulated by a critique of the Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis. I don't, the Savannah IQ interaction, no, but I think it's stimulated something good, which is, I hope, good, which is that idea.
Another quick question. Are you aware of evidence that suggests that gifted folks, and I'll say top 2%, 130 and above, have slower processing, and that's potentially why they don't score as highly as you were suggesting previously on IQ tests? Because if you're doing something that's heavily loaded in terms of fluid intelligence, you might find you score lower than.
There was something like this, yeah. I'm afraid I am dimly aware. In general, you'd find that people that have high intelligence have higher, have shorter reaction times. Yeah. But I'm perfectly possible at the outlier level that's not the case, because I know they overthink it or something like that. And I remember. That would be a good example, that you would overthink it and therefore you would get a bad mark. And you can totally see it if you were doing your GCSEs or something like that. You can totally see it, that you would get some stupid question that an ordinary person would just get the right answer, learn the information, apply it, whereas somebody else would overthink
deconstructing it. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, or a clever person. Well, is the sun a renewable energy source? I mean, it's going to explode one day. I mean,
yeah.
It's not going to be renewable when it's a white dwarf or whatever, is it?
No mark.
So that kind of thing. So it may well be that at a very high level they do process. I am dimly aware there was some paper on this, but I can't remember. I read years and years ago. Yeah.
Fair enough. So I guess I bring us on to the end game here and talk about ways out of G decline. We've mentioned a few of them, and I remember we had a brief Twitter conversation about embryo selection and Nick Bostrom's paper that he co-authored with Carl Schumann. So one thing, I guess, to preface this, is a shower thought that I had the other day. Obviously, you as soon as you start to talk about this, people are saying eugenics, right? And as a brief anecdote, I did a video, I think, on something to do with intelligence, and I posted it on the anarchism subreddit. I thought it was vaguely interesting, and I didn't even mention the word eugenics, and immediately that was the first comment, and it was blocked within 30 seconds. So there is this kind of reactionary tendency on the the further you go left to be like, anything to do with intelligence, it's boom, eugenics. And I was wondering, do you think if you could say to these people who are probably in the Venn diagram with wokeness, there's going to be a substantial overlap. Do you think if you said, right, we could CRISPR out racism, right? We could make it so that there are, obviously bollocks, but just as an interesting philosophical thought experiment, you said, right, we can actually make no more racist people by CRISPRing out those genes. Do you think they would agree to that?
They would be in favor of that. Yeah, they are not logically consistent. Remember,
right? So you can get them to agree to the thing on principle.
Always the but then when they can believe contradictory things. So when the point is that everything is about what makes them look good, what makes them feel good, what gives them status, what makes them feel special, whatever. And so you could say to them, yeah, we could select out racists. They would be entirely in favor. They would say, yeah, castrate all the racists. They'd be entirely in favor of that. But then if you said, okay, well, it follows from this, then they would say no. And they would come up with some word salad, some cognitive dissonance of justifying themselves that they weren't being inconsistent.
Well, Emil Kierkegaard pointed out, I think he said, everyone loves on the left when you find when a study comes out saying racists have substantially lower IQ. You can get them to accept the premises, which really you couldn't do in the 60s and the 70s, with E.O. Wilson and so many people being slandered for even daring to broach these topics. So we've at least been able to mainstream a lot of this research, right?
They love that, but then if you turn around and tell them the truth, which is that left-wing people have substantially higher psychoticism, then no, it's all nonsense or whatever. So it's just entirely self-serving. I have gone out there and said, yep, left-wing people have higher IQ than right-wing people, and for that, the right-wing equivalent of the woke, the right-wing irrationalists have a go at me and say, oh, he's saying we're stupid. Well, I'm not saying, to the extent that I'm saying you're stupid, I'm right-wing, but I'm simply telling the truth. And for them, no, that doesn't factor into things. There's things truth. There's what's in my interest and what makes me feel good. And truth be damned. And that's on both sides. And so the other thing, people had to go at me for saying, oh, he says that Ashkenazi Jews are much cleverer than white people. Well, he's a Jew lover. No, hang on, no. They do. They just do.
Have you seen how many Nobel Prizes and
what
chess
I think
war
about the Jews or don't think about the Jews? They have Ashkenazi Jews, not Mizrahim Jews, not Sephardi Jews, Ashkenazi Jews. They just do, and it's just irrational. They're just irrational and focused around their own feelings and whatever. So no, you can't have you can have a logical discussion with these people within anything that doesn't trigger them, but beyond that, if it does, then no, you can't. As for the solutions, I mean, I did myself and a colleague did some calculations to keep the IQ as it is now, just as it is now, so it doesn't go down further. And this would do nothing about, or it would do very little about, the rise in mutation of genes for bad health and personality or whatever. Just IQ. You'd have to ensure that anybody below an IQ of 92, which is about a third of the population, didn't breed. That's what you'd have to do. And I don't know how you would do that. I can't see that happening. I think that will be very difficult to achieve. I mean, someone like the Prime Minister of Singapore, or Lee Kuan Yew, he had various incentives in mind. If you've got an IQ of below this, then we will, and you don't have children, you only have one child, then we will make sure that child has a place at a really good school. He had incentives like that, and the positive incentives for intelligent people to have kids. And it was in 1983, and there was this huge backlash against it in Singapore subsequent elections, so he stopped it. But he's the only post World War II politician that has taken this seriously. It was the Depression that did for it, in the 29 crash that did for it. People think it was the war or whatever. It wasn't. It was the Depression. That was what did for it. Because then you had people who were highly intelligent and sophisticated and whatever, who lost everything. And of course, they weren't prepared to believe that that was because they were genetically deficient. And so suddenly belief in eugenics started to decline.
What do you think about the neuroscience of intelligence? I mean, obviously, just quoting Richard Hayes' famous book, he has a chapter there where he talks about maybe this type of research could lead to IQ pills. Do you think this is a possible way out? Also, perhaps you want to tell people
think
about
it's a way out. I think that it's
just a genetic caste system.
It might slow it down or something like that. But no, it's not. It's so extreme what's happening. The collapse in IQ is so extreme. The will to do anything about it is so tiny. The takeover of individualist values is so substantial. And also, why would it be different? Why would we be different from any other civilization? Civilizations go through a rise and fall. They select strongly for intelligence. The fruits of intelligence manifest. You have the civilization. This creates dysphoria among those that have high IQ. The people that have high IQ stop having children. You get a rise in mutational load. You get feminism. You get homosexuality. You get everything that we're seeing now, you had in a less pronounced form with the decline of Greece, the decline of Rome, and the decline of Baghdad. You had female lawyers and female imams during the decline of Baghdad. And if you read Sir John Glove's book on this, the level of similarity is uncanny. And what I would expect to happen is it'll go the same way, which is the breakup of polities, which is the civilization holding out in some refugia like Byzantium or somewhere like that. The only thing we have to hope doesn't happen is some major catastrophe, like a volcanic eruption, which did for the Minoan civilization, which was the Bronze Age collapse, because then the collapse is very sudden. We did have, with the Roman collapse, it was aided by the Justinian plague, which killed about 60% of people in Europe. So it was kind of pushed along by that. Mm-hmm. But if we have something like that, then you could have an extraordinary collapse, because I mean, most people now, they don't know how to do gardening, let alone hunt. So the important information is not being passed on. And that's one of the problems. If you read books on like the North Korean famine in the 90s, it's quite interesting who survives. Who dies first? All the old people and all the very young people, they die. And anyone that is like athletic, but doesn't easily accrue fat, they die. And then it's anyone that has a job where they work for the state or whatever, they're not getting any money, so they're going to die. And everyone works for the state, but anyone it's like a high level job, like being a doctor or something like that, they're going to die. And then it's just up to clever people to find food and to come up with ingenious ways of getting food and so on. It was a selection event in North Korea. I wonder how high their IQ is. I bet it's quite high because of the famine.
And do you want to tell people why you think something like embryo selection is okay?
Well, you'd have to have a lot of people doing it, and also it's a bit like with the growing grapes for wine or whatever, that people think, oh well, we will interfere with this in order to make it better, and then you just get bigger leaves. It's actually the process of growing against fighting against a difficult soil environment that creates the best grapes. And so if you bypass these very subtle pressures, such as sperms, such as the woman's immune system or whatever, then you can get unpredictable and often bad results. So fine, you're selecting for intelligence, but perhaps that's interfering with something else. We're the products of a long period of group selection in which lots of things have been selected for concomitantly. So you'd have to do something quite complicated, and we don't have the level yet to do that. And as I said, even if we did, everybody with an IQ of below 92 would have to be stopped from breeding, and every generation. I just don't see how a society would do anything other than collapse into war if it tried to do something like that.
Do you think, I know Gattaca gets invoked every time a discussion like this takes place, but do you think that we are heading to something like a genetic caste system before the collapse?
Well, you could argue we already have something like a genetic caste system.
Exacerbated.
Social. I mean, there was a paper published in the 80s which found that there's different modal blood types between different social classes in England. So yeah, I think that once you bring in a meritocracy, then which we kind of have to a greater extent than we did when, let's say, my grandparents were kids, then people are much more able to find people that are genetically like them and come apart.
I think Daniel Nettle at Newcastle University authored a paper in 2001 showing that a cognitive meritocracy had already been basically achieved. You might not.
Yeah, and so then you get very little social movement, which is to be predicted. I mean, you had this long period of time where the prime ministers were from state school backgrounds or whatever, ordinary backgrounds. That has now stopped. That makes complete sense. That of course it has stopped. Why wouldn't it stop? And so you created this effectively this caste system where people don't tend to move much. Once you have a meritocracy, then you end up with cognitive stratification and also personality stratification and health stratification, because these things all intercorrelate, and that's what's happening. And then if you go to places, you then get basically entire cities where everyone's poor, where there is no middle class, like Hastings, Blackpool, Bridgend.
For American viewers, you can Google those places.
Yeah, Google those places, or go to. I mean, there's a number of places like that in America. There's any number of places like that in America. I was in a place, I don't know, some town in North Carolina, and I went into a place called Golden Corral, which is a buffet restaurant. You pay $11 or something, and you can eat as much as you like, and they do eat as much as you like. And the level of fatness there was beyond anything I've ever seen. A woman was sitting on a chair and her buttocks literally drooped like an upside down U, like a horseshoe. I mean, it was, and they had a chocolate fountain there. I mean, imagine what that would do to you. So, I mean, it was, you could identify class by what people look like. It's in a way that wasn't previously as obvious.
I've taken a lot of your time. I just want to end in a slightly odd way, but I'll explain why. When I announced on my Patreon that you were coming on, I think that someone left because they probably Googled you and found the Rational Wiki article saying that you're, Hitler incarnate, right? You're evil incarnate. So I just wanted to, but even if you go on the normal Wikipedia article, right? I'm just going to read this out for people. So it says your name, British author and vlogger, not an academic apparently, but anyway. He has written controversial racialist articles for fringe far-right journals such as Mankind Quarterly and Open Psych, as well as articles for mainstream scientific journals such as Personality and Individual Differences in Intelligence. Some of the books Dutton has authored have been published by Washington Summit Publishers, operated by neo-Nazi Richard B. Spencer. So inevitably, right, if someone actually has left, stop supporting my channel because apparently I'm speaking to you.
Well, I'd be careful. I've been banned from Patreon because of the research I do. Apparently, you're not allowed to be on Patreon if you do research which promotes negative racial stereotypes. I was banned for that reason. So you'll probably get banned from there eventually. So I'd go on Subscribestar if I were you. They're not as rubbish as Patreon. But anyway, yeah, I mean, you can see Wikipedia is a perfectly good resource, except it has a woke bias. And so when it comes to anybody that questions the wokeism, then you do not get an unbiased Wikipedia page. Why doesn't that Wikipedia page mention the fact that I've written twice for The Guardian? One of my articles for The Guardian caused a great shift in medical policy in the city of Oulu and was written about in all the Finnish newspapers, on the Finnish radio, discussed on TV. They don't mention it. Why don't they mention the fact that I published an article in the Morning Star, the newspaper of the British Communist Party? Don't mention it. Why don't they mention all my articles for the Times Higher Education or Family Tree? I've been on the radio, Radio Wales I've been on, for example. I've been on television in Italy, in Germany about my research. Don't mention it. They just decide to slant it in a certain way. And it's so, it's not just me, anybody like that, anybody that in this research area, suddenly the articles are unbelievable. And if you're stupid enough to believe them, they're more for you. They're perfectly sensible with regard to almost anybody else. But in anyone that they regard as on the far right, then suddenly it's just open season for an utterly unreasonable article. I mean, Richard Lynn has written articles published by, written in the books published by Washington Summit. Is that top of his Wikipedia page? I don't believe it is. James Flynn published articles in the Mankind Quarterly. Is that top of his Wikipedia page? No. So it's a hit job, manifestly. And your Patreon person that got very upset is obviously a bit of a midwit.
Have you found that the invitations have dried up since you've explored more and more of the controversial research? Because all it takes is for a producer. Have you found that the invitations to go on, for example, the radio in the Anglophone countries have dried up? Because all it takes is a producer from the BBC to be like, Ed Dutton, Wikipedia. Turns out he's a racist. Not going to take that risk.
I haven't. I haven't had any for. It was a long time ago when it was way before. It was I haven't been asked on.
And you wouldn't expect to be.
Perhaps. I wouldn't expect it to be. No. But then on the other hand, I'm reaching a far larger audience than I reached back then. So back then I would get my academic articles reported in newspapers. But now I seem to be, I get recognized in the street. I was recognized in the street yesterday and someone wanted a selfie. So I think I'm reaching a larger audience via this internet method thing that I discovered in 2019. I went on, I was interviewed on James Deddingpole's show. And then I noticed the results and I was like, well, I want a bit of that. So maybe internet is the way forward.
Well, long may it continue.
All right.
Professor Edward Dutton, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ideas Sleep Furiously podcast. Since you've made it to the end, I might as well plug my Substack newsletter. I've just launched this newsletter, and I'm going to be writing mainly about intelligence and stupidity, two of my favourite topics, mainly because we can solve a lot of our problems by reducing one and increasing the other. Each month I'll also be releasing a separate newsletter called the Odyssean Project, which is more of a policy-driven newsletter that's also aiming to debunk common education myths. So if you're interested in this type of thing, and this is the direction I'm trying to take the podcast, which is really just an excuse for me to speak to interesting people who are tangentially relevant to the book that I'm currently writing on gifted children and the mistreatment of giftedness in the West. So if you're interested in any of that, I encourage you to check out my Substack, where I'll be writing mainly about those two things, but also about philosophical matters and, occasionally interesting research findings, which I obviously try to put on the main channel in the form of shorts. And that may well evolve into a weekly or bi-weekly research show roundup. So if you've got any thoughts on that, if you think that would be a cool idea for a show, then let me know in the comments down below. But thank you for listening. And if you really want to support the show, check out the Patreon, where you can also join a book club and get Zoom calls with myself and, of course, early access to these videos.